Rich, Michael, welcome back to Talk Python to me. Awesome to have you both back on the show.
Good
Yeah,
to be
thanks for
here.
having us.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to talk about great things. I know it. It's going to be a great show. It's undoubtable, right?
I have no
It's a
doubt.
great day, and we're ready for, I think, what's going to be a great chat. Yeah.
I've heard about great docs, great tables, all of those things.
All the great things.
Yeah. So I had you on to talk about great tables, which was really fun. You all both from Posit.
Yeah.
And other than that, maybe let's do a quick introduction for folks. I mean, I don't know why anybody would not have listened to the Great Tables episode, but
Right.
in case they haven't, no, we honestly we get a bunch of new listeners all the time. So, yeah, let's do a quick round of introductions. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you
Yeah.
working on this project? Rich, start with you.
Yeah. I'm Rich. I work at Posit, PVC. I've been doing traditionally lots of R stuff, like in the past, but more lately. This is like the last 3 or 4 years. A lot more Python stuff. And actually, Michael, who's with me today, he taught me a lot about Python. Like I was pretty bad starting. Like I mean, I used it in the past, but I was open source stuff. I was bad. Michael has so much patience though, so he helped me get up to speed over a period of a year or so. So I owe a lot to him, and
Yeah, that's
he's a great guy.
that's really cool. I agree with that. I think it's hard to change a language. It's hard to switch to another language. And maybe you could speak to that real quick before Michael jumps in.
Yeah.
And just,
Yeah,
I've done that a
yeah,
couple times. You know, you spend so much time and energy and effort and getting really good at not just the language, the tools, the ecosystem, everything. And then you're
yeah,
like, oh no, I think I have to go over there for a while.
yeah. It feels like a bizarro situation. Like I know what I could be doing, what I should be doing, like theoretically, but things just don't jive. Sometimes it's like, oh, yeah. But then you get used to it, and then your previous language degrades. It's kind of like that sort of thing.
It's a little bit
Yeah,
sad in that regard, but
yeah,
for me, the real challenge was I have such a deep knowledge and mastery of this technology, and if I switch, at least the first time or two I did, I felt like I'm going to go back to the noobiest of noobs, and it's going to feel really
yeah.
bad. And I worked
Totally.
so hard for this knowledge and this experience. Why am I going to do this? Maybe I should never do that. Like, it was a big deal for me. Maybe you could just, I want to say that for other people out there who are not necessarily going R to Python, but just one tech to another.
Yeah, it's humbling, like I said, and well, with a good mentor and lots of patience, it can happen. Like,
Yeah, it's good to expand your skills, but
yeah,
the initial decision is rough.
yeah,
Michael, you've been the
Yeah.
shepherding Rich along the way. I love it. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't even say shepherding, or maybe there's like some mutual shepherding going on. So I'm Michael Chow. I'm a software engineer at Posit and have been for about 4 years on the open source team. Yeah. So I've worked with Rich on things like Great Tables. And I think that, yeah, I'm really interested in Python. I work on Python full time. It, I think if I had to send back what Rich is really good at, uh, Rich just has this crazy, freaky sense of style, and I think that's one thing that's drawn me to work with him on things. Is you just never know. Like, to be totally honest, people at Posit just never know what Rich is going to pull out, and I don't think any
loose
of us could
cannon.
have imagined it. He's our wild card, and it's been interesting because you can imagine like a programming language. Yeah, you could be like, oh, this person taught me this programming language. I don't really know how you teach Rich's style, but I feel like I'm kind of along for the ride. I'm like eating popcorn, helping out. And I think tools like Great Docs really reflect that, this interesting sense of style. Like Great Tables, he's just dipped into this rich history of table styling. How would you style it to present and maybe publish it? And so I've been excited to be along for the ride to just watch him cook and bring this unique sense of kind of like style and design into tools.
Yeah, that's really cool. Certain people just have a knack for APIs and the way that developer UX sort of thing. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I personally am excited for the mascot. The
Yeah, we
mascots.
Ooh,
Rich, I blew your cover. We were,
Yeah.
yeah. So Michael and I were talking a little bit at PyCon
Okay.
about Tablin, how you're
Tablin, yes. He hasn't been tried out very much.
mascot wizard.
Yeah. I
Who
love that
is
little guy.
Tablin, though? I wonder.
He's just a little table guy, a little table dude that appears, gives you help, and then disappears just as fast.
Right.
He doesn't fully realize that.
He's always thinking of you. He's never thinking of himself. You know, he's
Exactly
showing up, helping you out.
He's like the new Clippy or Bob, but much cooler because he's a table. He can display things. This
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I do think this speaks to our dynamic where Tablin just appeared one day, like while we were preparing a PyCon talk 2 years ago. Tablin just appeared in the slides, and I didn't know who Tablin was, and I was like, "Who or what is this?" It was like a slide of a table, and Tablin was popped out on the side, was saying, "Good job," and I was like, "Who's this spreadsheet with eyes and a mouth, cheering people on?" And Rich was like, "It's Tablin, of course."
Yeah. It's helpful to have a little dude that just wants to help. You know, it's like having like a pet, like a cat, except more useful.
I love it. That's really good. So, Michael, we had the great opportunity to meet up at PyCon just last week. I don't know how you feel about it. Personally, I'm still just a little bit recovering from the whole energy that was extracted from me, but it was really fun. And maybe just give us your thoughts on PyCon and how'd that go?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so interesting because we work on tools for data analysis, but PyCon is much more general. It's almost like all things Python. I think it's a really interesting conference versus like a PyData or a SciPy, which are way oriented towards like data tools specifically. But I love it. I find it really nice to be able to drop in and talk to just the full range of Python people who maybe have never used or done a lot of data analysis. So I find it really interesting to talk to folks who maybe almost universally, I think everybody has touched pandas, the library for data frames. And so that's the like funny kind of like point you can always talk to anyone about at PyCon. But I find it really nice. And I find the like PyCon organizers and the sort of Python Software Foundation, it's just so down to earth that, yeah, I really love dropping in. It doesn't feel super corporate. It feels like they're really like a group of passionate volunteers putting this like pretty big conference on. So yeah, I always love dropping in, even if it's like a kind of broader audience than the like data crew. I'm curious your experience. Have you gone to a lot of PyCons?
I think my first one, when was my first? Mid-teens, I would say 2015, 2016, something like that.
Yeah, nice.
I'd probably have gone to maybe 2/3 since then. We did have COVID in the middle. That was challenging. But yeah, I've been to a fair number and I really enjoy it. And for me, it's just nice to get together, meet folks like you and everyone else and just kind of remember, hey, this is a community of humans and not just docs. Never mind. I mean, docs are great. We're going to talk about how great docs can be, but like, it's also nice to just have these human connections and just connect with people but also outside of technology, right? Like, hey, let's just go sit in the sun for a while and talk. Like, have you seen the sun lately? No, I haven't seen it either. Let's go sit there.
Right. All day. Yeah. Yeah, for real. I feel like it is just putting the face behind the name or actually like touching down to chat does seem like a huge thing that you only do like say once or twice a year. Yeah, with most folks.
Yeah, at least for me, I can come back kind of revitalized to do more. So that's really, really sweet. Let's start our journey here. Talking about, let's just do a quick review of Great Tables. Because I know Great Tables was one of the inspirations for Great Docs. So we all got together, all three of us got together last year, I guess, to talk about Great Tables. So who wants to just do a quick reminder of this one?
Ooh, I'll go. So basically, Great Tables. It's maybe not many people know this. It's a port of an R package called GT. Not that important, but like the idea is good as it was then. You want display tables, what I call them, essentially summary tables, like static tables, and you want to present them, say, in a notebook or say like in some other publishable document as HTML. We also have a LaTeX output format. But the idea is you compose tables step by step. You add a header. You want a title. You get that too. You structure the table. You can format different cells, like usually entire columns of cells, and you can also style the table, which could be like like changing borders, adding cell backgrounds, things like that. And really, the idea is to make a table that you might see like in a print publication, but using your data like directly, like using a data frame. So you have the data in a form which is amenable to a summary table, and then in just a few like method calls, you've got the table.
You know what's yeah, that's awesome. What strikes me about this, when we had our conversation last year, it's just how much more there is to think about with tables than just an Excel like thing.
Yeah.
I came away realizing that it goes way deeper and there's a lot more nuance. It felt a little bit like, oh gosh, I can't remember the guy's name, but I'm sure you both have seen his books. But it's
Is it
maybe
Tufte?
No, Tufte. Tufte, yes.
Okay.
He's just like, oh, I see. Like, there's some lines and stuff. Like, no. Hold on. There's a lot going on. Like, there's many things you can communicate subtly without just being like, well, let's just call this out. Like, no, you don't even have to call it out. It's communicated through something more interesting. Tufte is that about just presenting sort of scientific information in general, but I felt that way about tables as well.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. We talked about this in our talk a few years back in PyCon. How like you can tell a story with a table, where you can communicate data in a better way, in a not a more optimized way, but a more legible way, where like your main point is like describe like a title and a subtitle, and you have notes at the bottom, and you can guide people through an analysis summary that way. Mm-hmm. And so just like with many different things, there's a good way to do it or a better way to do it.
You can just look at certain types of presented information and you go, wow, that looks really professional, or that looks really, really good, but I don't know why. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, this looks bad. That looks good, but I don't. Yes, I can't put my hand or my finger on like exactly what is really different. But that's really good, and that's not. And I feel like Great Tables kind of leans into that.
Yeah, I guess it takes the Tufte principle too, like having just the right amount of ink. I guess like not too much, just enough to communicate the structure of things, like the sort of like the architecture of the data you're laying out, and not doing much more than that. So there's a lot of that goes into this.
Indeed.
As a default thing. Yeah.
To the Tufte point too, Tufte's website, Tufte has like all of these just dumps of examples, just like example plot. It's almost like a very rough notebook. And I feel like with Great Tables, it was kind of similar. Like when I first came on, I knew basically nothing about this topic. And I saw the components of the table diagram. So you have it pulled up, but it has like a table broken apart into all its pieces, like a title, subtitle. It has this funny thing called the stub head and spanners. And I thought, like, does a person really need to know all this? But I think to the point of Tufte, like, and maybe what you're getting at too is Tufte really dives into like very specific, almost like dimensions of how you could represent data. One thing he gets really into is like spark lines, this idea that like how far could you get with a line that basically doesn't have any axis labels, but it's just like a trend. Like, is it going up or is it going down? And that happens a lot in tables. You'll put like these spark lines in a cell. Like if you're looking at stocks, you'll have like the stock numbers, and then you'll have a spark line that like indicates the kind of trend so people can grab it really fast. But I find what's interesting about Tufte is just that willingness to dive in so detailed about this one very specific action. And I feel like this table diagram is sort of similar to me. The the willingness to like break it apart so thoroughly. At first, I wasn't really convinced. It seemed like a lot of work, but yeah, I think to your point about Tufty, once you start looking at examples, you start to realize this kind of captures the like flavor or design of like good examples out there in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really out there. Like initially when I did it too, it was like, oh, is this too much? But naming things is so important. Otherwise, you're just awkwardly describing something over and over again. Like that cell to the top left or these cells off to the side. And eventually you just have to give it a name, even if it's not the best name. And these are actually names I stole from like basically a census manual on tables, I think written in 1949. Great ideas, like wonderful book. And it's on the web as a PDF still. It's a
Yeah,
scan.
I remember us talking about that.
Yeah,
And how
really good
interesting
stuff.
is it? Yeah, how interesting is it that the inspiration comes from pre-digital times?
Yes. Yeah.
And I
It
think
belongs.
that yeah, because
Yeah.
a lot of the software reduces some of these ideas. It's like, well, I have grids. I have a grid of cells, and sometimes the rows can be taller. Sometimes you can span a row. Okay, that's that. But if you just write it by hand when you have to way back in the day,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, maybe we could draw it differently, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I was like searching, like researching like anything on tables I could find just to get ideas and like, like what people thought was good. And it's really hard to find anything on tables. It's like, oh, but I did find that one thing, and like I'm forever in debt to the person who wrote it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's move on. But
Yeah.
if people are out there and they're doing presentations that involve tables, and especially if it's code generating those tables, check this out. It's quite interesting. So the next thing I want to talk about is just sort of surveying the landscape of what is out there, because we're going to talk about great docs, and great docs can generate static sites. There's some existing tools that generate docs as static site. There's some really good tools that just generate static sites that maybe people could put into docs. Like there's a lot of things that are somewhat similar. There's also stuff that's in the same space but different. So maybe we could kind of go through and, like I know you all have mentioned Sphinx is a real popular one in the Python space. There's MkDocs. I had Martin from Zensical on not too long ago. So maybe we could talk first about some of the existing tools that are, I guess, as similar as possible to what you're doing.
Yeah. Michael, would you like to speak on this? Because I know you did a deep dive recently on these.
Yeah. So Sphinx, I think, and maybe to kick off some helpful context to great docs is that, I worked a lot on early support for documentation with a tool called Quarto. But Rich actually took it to the next level, and this goes to, I think, Rich's style with great docs. So I have a lot of bizarre experience looking at the history of Python docs. I think Sphinx is one of the OG site builders. I think this is the case. So I think one interesting fact is, as I understand it, I think python.org, don't quote me on this, I think it was originally done in like LaTeX or something like that, the Python docs. And I think that they moved to Sphinx at some point. So like Sphinx has a really interesting history in Python. Like if you go back 25, 30 years, Python docs had to exist using some tool, right? And at some point, Sphinx emerged as kind of like this dominant site builder for Python and Python docs. Does it say? Yeah, so Python docs are in Sphinx. This Python doc site has a how-to, Python how-tos. This is another weird fact. The how-tos emerged. I don't remember exactly when they emerged. It was like in the last 30 years, I think, as part of the Linux project.
Yeah.
So the term how-to, as I understand it, emerged in the Linux docs. But all these things, like, it's so funny. We see them today, and maybe it seems we just think about like, oh, there's the Python docs. But actually, at a certain point, Sphinx emerged, this concept of a how-to emerged. These are all things that over the last, I think, like 30 years, sort of like came into existence. So Sphinx is like the OG doc site. A lot of tools use it. Pandas uses it to generate its APIs. Polars uses it as well. So some really big Python tools use it to generate their API docs. It uses this thing called restructured text. I will say, like, I don't know that a lot of open tool developers love it. I'm going to be a bit careful here because I think it's been so useful, but I do think that restructured text is kind of not the thing most open source developers are reaching for these days. But Sphinx is like the OG doc site, and it powers a ton of docs like python.org and pandas.
Yeah. I'm sure it was really made a huge improvement when it came out though, right?
Yeah, I think
if you're doing a low tech before, that's got to be pretty rough.
Yeah.
It's like 0 to 1 essentially. I think switching from lit tech to Sphinx for like your Python docs.
Yeah, and if I see an RST file, just a little tear wells up in my eye. I'm like, oh gosh, here we go.
It's almost like a rite of passage. I feel like as a Python developer producing docs in the like Sphinx world, you just kind of like I learned Sphinx and RST to generate docs essentially. It's like, I feel like that was my rite of passage into like software development.
Yeah, 100%. So we've also got MkDocs or MkDocs probably. I don't know. I always feel like
I say MkDocs, but no, I have no. So I mean, you had the Zensical people, so I feel like they. Do you have a read on it?
If I try to remember, I feel like Martin said MkDocs, but
whoa,
I'm not. He could have easily said MkDocs, and I was not paying attention.
Yeah.
I'm a MkDocser, so.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. A lot of these that could be said one way or another. I really wish, and maybe this does, but I really wish on their GitHub repo they just have a little MP3 like, here's how you say it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Little audio button.
Yeah, exactly. Like a green unicorn, like G unicorn versus Goonicorn is like a one that I think goes around and around. Still, okay. So Zensical is one of the more modern ones. So I think that's pretty interesting. Honestly, I'm not sure how much it lands in the Sphinx MkDocs world or in the other, maybe the just pure static site generator side of things. So,
I mean,
go ahead.
The Zensical folks came on and probably have the best sense, but my sense is it's also meant to be kind of I might be wrong, drop-in replacement for MkDocs. I know their community.
It is, it is a it is a compatibility, at least compatible for a material for MkDocs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say it's in that realm.
It also seems like they're heading towards general purpose or knowledge bases, which goes maybe a bit beyond just like
yes, exactly. And that was my like uncertainty is how do I classify it, right? Because it doesn't even necessarily. If you look at their H2, it doesn't say the best way to make your docs, right? It's a scalable way for technical writing.
Yeah.
Right. Which makes it, I think, land a little more in the Hugo or Ghost side of things. So that's another part to talk about. Is just like static sites in general. Why would I choose, say, Sphinx over Hugo or Hugo over Sphinx or something like that? You guys got a sense?
It seems a bit like Mintlify. They have the same sort of thing going too. They do documentation sites, but they go a bit beyond. It's like general purpose, lots of different languages supported. But it is documentation, but not really so much like a site, like just general purpose site generator. So
right. So Hugo and Ghost, I don't know Ghost very well, but Hugo, for example, I use that a lot for blogs. I've seen one of my friends does really cool stuff just in general with Hugo, making general purpose sites. I feel like this is much more focused on, I just need a static site and much less, I need it to read my doc strings and categorize my modules and API calls and put in that kind of stuff, right? So that's another realm that is similar to what you all are doing, but certainly not the same.
Yeah, if you want to throw another one in, there's Quarto, that by the company we
Yeah.
work at, Posit, and that does sites and much more beyond.
I do think
Yeah, I had JJ on, and I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the other guy I had
Charles.
on. Yeah, I think it was Charles.
Oh, cool.
To talk about Quarto a little while ago. That was fun.
Yeah, I do think a lot of the questions with like Hugo versus something more targeted at like docs for a tool is hitting on kind of like what are the parts of a doc site? You know, like what's technical writing versus like package documentation? Am I just doing a Hugo thing? Like, is what I'm doing similar enough to like a blog or a website with content, which is really common? Like my website's in Hugo. Or do I need something special to like dump out my like API docs to dump out the things for my like functions and classes? Or could I jam that into Hugo? That's a common kind of hybrid path. Could my thing just dump my info into Hugo? It's all kind of this dance between really, is this a general content problem? Is this a like very specific tool problem? Or can I kind of like jam them both together into something?
Yeah, that's an interesting problem. So maybe a good time to start talking about, great docs. What is it like? What's its value prop and positioning with regard to these other areas?
Well, on your screen you have package down, and
yes,
it has
an origin.
actually coming from R. I can't help but to be a little bit influenced by package down. I use it a lot in my R projects, and it kind of felt like there's a package down sized hole in the Python docs ecosystem, just a little bit, where you can just point something at your docs and it makes something pretty fast with pretty much no configuration. That's like the challenge. Does it present something that's serviceable, like usable right away? And that's what I was shooting for. And I think that's kind of like where I landed. And of course, we have tons of options to do way more things. But I wanted to give something that was, you just start it right away and it gives you something. Like, for instance, you have doc strings and such, and they all just get captured and put into the API reference section.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, you would attend to it and organize it, and then arrange it and exclude things. But at the very beginning, it would just give you something at least. So that was kind of like my goal, I think.
The up and running super quick is one of the themes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I suspect maybe a lot of people are getting more into Python now because of agents, AI, LLMs, and such, and are spinning up small projects. And maybe they're even building their documentation sites with using the same things like LLMs. So getting something up quickly, and maybe the project doesn't last very long. It's just like something just to get going, and you don't want to spend a ton of time on learning like the docs, a new doc system. So this sort of thing is pretty valuable. But we still give you the opportunity, of course, to like add things and do really cool, sophisticated sites. But just the up and running part, it was super important to me.
So by default, you can point it at a package or a set of Python files or something and say, generate docs around that, and it will look for doc strings and so on, and then generate some kind of hierarchical.
Yeah, exactly. And we tested it quite a bit on different package layouts, like different packaging systems, and it seems to introspect pretty well based on all sorts of variation. So, and we do test this a lot. So the promise is that it does give you something.
Yeah.
And you can also create just more static site type stuff as well, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I think the user guide's a good example. Like if you click the expandable thing in the top left.
Yeah, everything's so
nice.
zoomed. Yeah, everything's so zoomed on my little small streaming screen. So
that's fair.
Yeah, the user guide got it.
It's nice. The user guide's just a folder in the repo. with files in it. But it's nice like that puts up this like, yeah, more kind of general bit of content where it's not your API reference, which is like each individual function explained, but a more general kind of guide, kind of like a bigger, higher level like introduction to the package. But it's nice that, to your point, like, can you have more general kind of content? It's nice. This is just a folder in the repo. So getting started with the user guide's like super fast.
Yeah,
Nice.
and this site is like a demonstration. We're showing like the Great Docs site, and we're just looking at it. And you can just add another directory, and like recipes at the top nav. That's just another directory, and we sort of declared it in our configuration file. So you can just create something similar to a user guide. But we sort of treat a user guide as a sort of like a first class thing, because I'm a little bit opinionated about how these doc sites should be. So it kind of serves as a model. So like the idea is that if someone sees this and says, yeah, I would like something like this, then like Great Docs would be a good fit. You just have to sort of emulate what we have here, do a few things, and you pretty much got it. Beyond the simple sort of like init and then like build, we can just go a little bit beyond.
Yeah.
Sitting here talking to you makes me think, I've got some open source projects. I really should have better docs for them. maybe I'll try working on them with Great Docs. That would be really fun.
Oh, well, yeah, and I love your feedback. I'm always looking for like ideas and feedback. Right now, I'm not gonna make a big deal of it, but I'm looking for users because this is a brand new project. So like feedback is a bit scant at this point. So yeah, let me know how it goes.
Yeah, I will definitely. One of the things that's nice here that I'm noticing is it's got a lot of elements of the display that go beyond just standard Markdown that I think are really nice. Like, for example, you've got these.
Oh,
I guess these are probably like little tags or badges.
Yeah, actually
and then
tags.
also,
Sorry.
Yeah, and then also you've got a tabbed UI for like, here's how you install it on Mac, Linux, Windows, but in the same little area, right? You just like click the tab for your OS.
Yeah, we call those tab sets in Quarto. They're like a Quarto special, really.
Yeah.
They just come part and parcel with Quarto.
Yeah. Sweet. So, I feel like you can do some nice authorship beyond that. Like when I was working on my book, I'm like, I want to write it in Markdown, but I also want to have these little call outs or like an action or, the little sidebar. Like, how in the heck am I going to get that to come out of Pandoc? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I eventually got it to work by basically getting a little pre-parser that would just turn those into HTML and allow the Markdown to have HTML. But
I think that's what makes a good user guide. A good user guide, we actually show, like, not just like show the code, but actually show the result, and you can totally do that. With a good user guide, and that's what I try to demonstrate here in the Great Docs user guide. That we have these things. Here's how they look. You can have these too.
Yeah, it definitely looks good.
That's the one thing too with Quarto that, like, if I had to make the case for Quarto for a lot of people doing documentation, it's that it's really easy to run code. Running code is kind of like most of Quarto's game. Yeah. That it's you author using a QMD. It's essentially a Markdown file, but your code blocks can be executed.
Yeah.
So it's really inconvenient for docs, like being able to include code snippets with their out, and then they get run and their outputs are there. So that's kind of the impetus, I think, in this case for Quarto is you're doing like really easy execution of code. It's possible in other tools, and I know MkDocs strings, who I think its author is working with Zensical now too, but like they've created a lot of good ways for you to be able to do this as well, like execute code. But I do think that's one area where people stub their toe a lot is like, oh, like if I'm polars or pandas, I'm a data frame library. I probably want a lot of examples. And then you get stuck in this like funny dance, like how do I execute the code for my examples? And so I think tools like Quarto are really kind of aimed at that use case. Like you're a person running code and generating reports. that have code and that produce graphs and tables and all that.
And I think the examples, like being executable, made the great tables examples really powerful. You can see the code for a table and then see the table right below, like in the actual like site, which is, we didn't have to paste that in. It was basically just generated right there.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which is actually incredible. You can put prose around it as well. So it's like, it reads just like a little mini guide in each doc string.
Does it run at build time, or does it somehow run in the website?
Oh, build time. At build time.
Yeah. I'm like, okay,
But you can also
WebAssembly or something fun like that. No.
You could do that.
Yeah. Another nice thing is you can freeze it. So like if you have a bit of code that or like let's say you have a blog post and you don't want to rerun it every time because like over the years, maybe you like know the code's going to get out of date or it takes a long time to run. You can do something called freeze. You can Quarto freeze it. And that essentially like caches the outputs so that you can re-render it without executing the code every time. So that's useful. Like great tables, we have kind of a growing log of blog posts and we don't want to re-execute them every time because that starts to get pretty time consuming. So we can just freeze their outputs and then they generate super fast.
Another reason you might want to freeze it is you're accessing live data off an API or website, and you want to talk about the results. And if it changes, like all of a sudden your prose is like, why are you talking about this? It doesn't say that. Like, well, it used to when I did it.
Yeah, you might imagine like a benchmark section example if it runs a long time, or you just accessing some keys on your personal machine. Absolutely, freezing is great for that. You basically froze stuff on your personal computer, and you're just like sending it off to like CI.
And I think there's like there's also like a million of these things that you encounter when you start generating doc sites or like personal content, which is like, maybe I don't want to run some stuff. Maybe I want to like include a snippet from one thing somewhere else. Or maybe I want to do like all kinds of like output customization. I just feel like there's a million little boxes to check. So that's one. One other reason we use Quarto is we belong to the company that created Quarto, but I think those like little pieces of detail for people generating like scientific documents and stuff goes a long way.
It's pretty wild too because Quarto has a pretty big extension system as well, like pretty active. So there's like ways, besides like different output types, there's like extensions, like and different types of extensions too, like different classes of extensions. So it goes really deep.
Quarto is really neat. And you all keep talking about Quarto because it's the foundation of what's happening with great tables, right? It's been a while since I had JJ and Carlos on the podcast to talk about Quarto, but so maybe just give folks a bit of a refresher of what is Quarto and then how that relates back to great tables.
So Quarto is like an open source publishing system. So you can make things like sites, like documents, like books, for instance. You can make presentations. It's probably a few more I'm missing, and it's cross-language as well. And like you can have code cells. So it has computational notebooks is what they call them because they have cells, which are basically computational cells, which can accept, which have different engines. So you can run some R code, run some Python, some Julia, what have you, many other things as well. And then you can stitch them, basically render them into documents using PanDoc for the most part, and probably other things too for different output types. And it just really batteries included. It has things like you just see on the site, citations, cross-refs. It's got it all essentially. And so how it relates to CoreDoc and to Great Docs, we're using CoreDoc as but not really. Like I think with CoreDoc, it's the way I see it is like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. CoreDoc, you're creating a reference API, but you're still basically using Quarto. You're within the Quarto itself. You're still creating the Quarto config. But with Great Docs, it's kind of like Quarto is a bit sort of like we're using it obviously, but you don't have to know a lot about Quarto. You can basically get by with just a few things you see, in like the user guide, and not have to like go deeply into Quarto. It sort of like hides it a little bit, or doesn't really advertise it as much, even though we're using it a lot.
Just for some context, I mentioned before I developed a tool called Quarto, which is another documentation generator for Quarto. So just to clarify, like the context, like Quarto is a much more kind of like low level, no frills. So like the IBIS project uses it. So that's another pretty big Python tool, but it's like very like simple. It's more about like dump your API reference, and then you're responsible for like customizing your website. And so it's for people who really want to like be in control and set it all up. I think Rich is kind of underselling. I think Great Docs is just dripping in style. I think that's one of the keys, is it's made to be kind of like an all-in-one, something really nice out of the box that's opinionated. But I just wanted to clarify for context, Quarto is another tool outside of Quarto. So I know we've checked a lot of tools out. But one thing that's interesting is I know like when we look at Great Docs, it's easy to see like some of the stuff that jumps out, but there's actually, I think to Rich's credit, there's a ton of like little things inside Great Docs that you almost don't notice until you need them. Like there's a million little pieces to doc sites, and some of them are actually pretty intriguing. Like if you go to the Great Docs API reference, I think it kind of like speaks to Rich's style that he's included a ton of stuff out of the box for this, including this little like filter bar. So if you click on the top left, you can sort of like filter on the page for different pieces.
Great for
That's like,
guys.
Yeah, I think for just to illustrate the difference, so Quarto is a really bare bones tool. It's like we generate an API for you. Great Docs, like this filter bar where you can like type in it and it shows you live on the page, like it filters your reference items. That's just pure Rich, just like wilding out on what docs could be. And I think there are like a million little examples of this kind of in Great Docs.
Kind of, yeah, because like I find little things that annoy me and I want to fix them, but and so this is my this is almost like a Python site generator for me in lots of ways, but I'm hoping that other people feel these little pain points as well. And
I've certainly felt it. I've gone to documentation sites and searched for stuff on there, and then you see a little spinner searching. It's a static site. What are we doing? Why am I waiting? This doesn't make any sense to me, but okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even this CLI button, like, if you click that, that's like if you have a command line interface for your tool, which is so hot today, like AI loves command line interfaces. Claude Code's just bash executing everything. A lot of people have CLIs. I think it also speaks a lot to Rich's style that he created this spot for your CLI docs to live.
Very important.
And then at the top right, if you look, there's like a copy. You can copy the whole page to Markdown or view it as Markdown. I never would have thought of that. Like, to me, I would never go that far to give people something nice. I don't know if I'm just like a curmudgeon-y engineer. I think Rich is just dreaming up like, I don't know, different ways you could interact with docs, copy the page to Markdown. And I don't doubt that it's like incredibly useful. To me, this strikes me
I think it's
as
very
like,
useful, yeah.
Yeah. When I saw that table graph for Great Tables, like breaking apart the table into every little piece, this strikes me as Rich again, like imagining every little thing a doc site could do. So I think that's why I'm so kind of gassed up about.
This is delightful. We're going to come back to AI stuff later, but
nice.
I mean, we're We don't have that much time left, honestly, you guys. We've been talking and not making a lot of progress because we're just diving into
Docs
it. It's so
talk.
fun.
Yeah.
I know, it's so fun. But I can easily see I'm working on a project
Yeah.
and I've got Claude or some Codex or whatever, and it's just not getting it for a certain function. Just go over to the docs, hit copy pages, Markdown, and just go, no AI, this is the docs, read it. Because
Yeah.
giving it a Markdown result of what this is versus all the nav and all the stuff, and it's trying to understand what's the essence of the page. If you tell it to just go to the page, it's really, really different.
Yeah, it's a bit more immediate, I think. And also you can like change the URL if you really want to .md and just give it the URL. So many ways to do it. Many ways.
Yeah. I love that. So instead of HTML.md.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's really cool.
So if you or Claude Code are reading the docs, a lot of good.
Save some tokens.
Yeah. That's cool. Did I do that for TalkPython? I think I did. Yeah. If you do that on
nice.
TalkPython, by the way,
Nice.
you can do just put .md on the end of any episode name, and it gives you the Markdown equivalent of that as well. So
It's all the rage.
yeah. So I mean, we're on the same vibes here. I'm loving it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it might even help for context. I'd be curious to hear your, like when you added that Markdown and some of your motivation for Markdownifying your site.
I didn't do it for people. I did it for AI and SEO
For the machine.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the machine. So I added if I could type, I added an LLMs.txt to try to get the AIs to understand the podcast better. And some of the things that I gave it was this ability to just put Markdown at the end. But also I added like a CLI and an MCP and different things for an API, search API. I'm like, okay, AI, there's 7.5 million words of content over 11 years. I want you to know about it and be able to use it. How many ways can I imagine up giving something to it? And this render as Markdown was certainly one of them.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I also added some silly stuff that's like for just for me, because I've got, for example, I've got to update, say, the YouTube recommendations. So or listings after the live stream, I want them to have like links and stuff, so I can say .youtube on the end, and it gives me the contents for like the YouTube render. So it kind of was building on this, like how can I help myself be more efficient, but also machine. So anyway, that's the story.
This is great. It's like Docs'
that's so
workflow, really, right? It fits in nicely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, circling back around, I'm really impressed with some of these little nuances that are super nice. Yeah. I think that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Great
Yeah,
Docs
we want
does
to go
also
further on
have
this too. Like it's basically just nicing up the docs and make them good for humans, but also consumable by LLMs or agents.
It's just Rich, it's a fad. We don't really need to worry about it. It's going to go away.
It'll pass. Yeah.
The bubble's going to burst. We can just ignore it. It's going to be fine. No. So let's talk. I want to talk about a couple of things here. So let's just do like a real quick little walkthrough of maybe getting started with this, because it's honestly not a whole lot to get started. But give us this. One of you all walk us through the quick start, just so people kind of know what's involved.
Yeah. So really, that command, like great docs init, that'll make the file that is basically what you need for the build. And with a lot of testing, it should work on many different like Python package like layouts and types. So you just need that. Of course, install great docs, install Quarto as well. So we got that as well before that. But once you have those things, it should do what it says on the screen, basically show you stuff in the terminal, which is all positive. It's creating that greatdocs.yaml file. And it should be pretty minimal what's in there. It should actually also be a little bit dynamic. Based on your project, it'll craft like the correct great docs YAML file or the config file. And then you could go ahead and customize, but you might just jump to building your documentation because that's the next easiest thing. It's just another command, great docs build. Mm-hmm. And what you get is a great -docs directory in your working directory. And that contains like the site folder. But you don't really have to worry about that because you have another command called great docs preview, which will basically launch like a web server and then put the site and in your default browser, basically just like let you see the site locally. And then because I'm a big fan of letting people know what's going on, so it should be totally a black box. I give on this page like a structure, the basic structure of like how it should look in your working directory. But that's kind of it. And I believe the next step for most people will just be getting this on CI if they're satisfied, and then just working from there, like modifying their initialization, not initialization, their config file to give the site more customization, personality, and there'll be authoring guides and things like that.
Very cool. So you've got the really nice watch feature. So Great Docs build -- watch.
Yes.
Which feels very Hugo to me, like you're going to build it so you can look at it, but then you want to edit it. So just, if you see any changes, just rebuild, right?
Yeah, exactly. Small sites will build fast, but this is way faster, obviously. So this is pretty essential for iterating, especially initially. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about this version? So this is an interesting aspect of the project.
Versions. Essentially, you may have multiple tagged versions of your site, and this is kind of like a wild thing. You can have different documentation sites based on your version, because you have, for instance, new things in your API.
Right. People maybe know that from Python, where you can go up here and drop down
exactly like version selector. So this is kind of like just seeing like certain versions of your site, and it gives you a selector. On the Great Docs site itself, we have a selector which is maximal. It has like every single version from the very first. And you can cruise in there and you'll see that there'll be way less in the earliest versions. Like if you look at the user guide for 0.1, which gives a little icon, a little scary, seeing it's unsupported. If you look at the user guide, it's pretty sparse. Like it's not as long as the other one. And if you look at the reference as well, it'll have less items. So it's aware of like what's available in which versions. And so you sort of set that up yourself, or you could just do it through that command. But
is that based on Git tags, or what is that?
Based on Git tags, yeah, that's right.
Okay. I was wondering, how does it even know?
Yeah, you have to give it some information. Like you have to, of course, give the tags. But if you actually configure it to do what it's doing here, like make the site, you just change your configuration to have it's basically just like a small config that you have to do, and you can set labels and things like that.
Can I wildcard it, or have it somehow pick up all the versions? I mean, you don't want to pick up all tags, but it'd be like
I don't think we have like
star.
I
don't
think we have version expressions like that yet. Yeah, but
not yet. Okay,
throw it in there.
I'm just thinking, if I have a project with 27 versions over time.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't do it through like this interface, like Great Docs build. This is just for like a very quick comparison.
Got it.
But if you would do it, like you'd probably put that in the config file, and you'd have to manually edit those. But I think with a Splat or something like that would be better.
And there's an API, of course, if you want to just have
it's kind of, you wouldn't do this, but it's just I threw it in there.
Well, probably because your commands use that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So might as well just let
being transparent, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Where do we want to go next? Let's cover just a couple of remaining things here while we got time. So, what about open source sustainability? Like, I know you all at Posit are doing a lot of things to open source your work and so on.
Yeah, well, we're pretty much like full time doing open source work. Essentially, and so I think these projects have like long life cycles with the same maintainer for long periods of time, which is great for project stability and things like that. And like, we're accountable for like, issues that come in, and for, releases, and making sure, it's not, like dead projects, like all the way down or whatever. So I think that's a great thing. And for instance, like Great Tables, I've been in it since the beginning, GT, which is where it came from, since 2017. So I think that helps a lot. It adds a lot of credibility to these projects that are not just being abandoned. There's no fear of it being abandoned or things like that. There's a person there, at least.
And I think Posit's found an interesting business model that's been long-term sustaining, but still allows you, as you said, to sort of work in open source. Maybe speak to that, either one of you, real quick.
Michael, would you like to?
True. Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's almost like not diving crazy deep into in a podcast. My favorite thing to say to people is that like we have a really large open source engineering team, dozens of open source engineers. People often ask like, how does Posit pay the bills for people to work on open source? And my favorite thing to say is like we have a bunch of boring enterprise tools, and no shade on Posit. I actually think that this is the best case scenario. Like we have a lot of tools that solve really painful problems if you're an enterprise. They could be useful in other settings, but it's like, how do I run a report every day? Or how do I host like Jupyter notebooks or VS Code for my, say, like data team or our studio? Those essentially pay the bills. That's Posit Connect and Posit Teams.
You've got a team of data scientists, but you don't necessarily have a DevOps team, but you still want to have their stuff running reliably, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a hard problem if you're a company, right? These are kind of tricky problems. Or you have like a really mean IT team. A cruel IT team could like hamstring you for years. But that's just to say, like we get to work on open source because these tools exist, and I think Posit exists. I think because the maintainers care so much about open source. I will say in terms of sustainability, one interaction I've really liked over the years is like in the docs realm. There's this person, I only know him as Pawamoy, his GitHub handle. I think it's Timothy or Timothy in France or France, I think. But he maintains the tools upstream of tools like Quarto and Great Docs. And we've interacted a bit in the past where I've done PRs on his tools. One's called Griff. And I think that's such an important part of sustainability too, is that he works on a documentation tool, MkDocs strings, but we're all able to collaborate on his tool Griff that actually powers all of our documentation sites. So I think that's a really important piece. I think to your point about being at PyCon and seeing people, I think us as open source maintainers chatting and even contributing and working on, say, like upstream tools is a really important part of keeping the ecosystem healthy and sustainable. We're not like multiple doc tools competing. I mean, to a degree, I do think they compete, but ultimately, like we're working on open source because we're passionate. And I think it helps to collaborate on our kind of like shared tools.
Yeah. 100% agree. Very cool. Now, Rich, you mentioned that it's a pretty new project.
Yeah.
Where are we going? What's next? What's on the roadmap?
Yeah, lots of things. I even have a roadmap on the site if anyone's interested. But I think it'll be like a lot more like documentation for different things, like new things. Like the other day, I was suggested to create documentation for MCP servers. I was like, good idea. We don't really have that. And there's, it's pretty easy to document. It's JSON, essentially. So we can take that apart, parse that, and present something.
That's a good point, because if you look at the MCP servers, they don't have structure in the way that traditional projects do, right? Yeah. They don't just have like a separate function for each thing. They've got this kind of weird invocation entry point where you pass like the tool you want to use, and it's a real different thing.
Documentation, prompt suggestions, things like that. So I think we could do a pretty good job there. The idea is pretty new, but like, I guess we're just trying to be or go where things are going and be a little bit ahead of the curve.
So would that somehow show itself as like where you've got the API and the CLI? Would there also be an MCP, or what do you think?
It's going to be a bit crowded, so I'm rethinking.
I know.
Part. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I don't really know.
This would be it. Like, but no, that's not quite it. There's one or two more things. So it might be just a drop down nav on like a drop down on the top nav. I'm thinking. So that's part of like what I have to think about. But there's things like that, and also like a recent thing we just did. This is very new, so it's almost like it's new enough. Is like skills, like publishing skills and making them available and making them browsable, right? So it's not top level. If you go to the first page, there's like a sidebar on the right, which gives you a lot of metadata. And one of
Okay.
the first few things is skills. And that gives you like a page on how to install these skills. So it's kind of like almost like a way not to just distribute, but a way to sort of like get a hold of skills. And there's a nice little sort of like disclosure there. Install these skills. It gives you instructions on how to do such things. And you can just browse the skills below and see what's there. You might just take bits of them, make your own skill, or you might just say, "No, these all look good. I'll just follow these instructions and install them for my project or globally." So we're trying to make that a bit
super.
easier.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Expose these
So,
things. Yeah.
yeah, that kind of brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about is the AI-ification. And by that, I don't mean are you using AI to write it or not? Like, I imagine there's some degree of that or whatever. But if I am a person with a project, a package or something I want to document, AI is really good at going like, well, let me pull out all these pieces and then like, sketch some stuff out for you.
Yeah.
Is there, and I can see now that you pointed me in the right direction, that there's a whole AI section, like how do AIs work with great docs, right? And so you've got the LLMs.txt, which is really nice. I referenced that before. People don't know this comes from, I believe from Jeremy Howard.
Yeah, that's right. We looked at this closely.
So did I, and I find it super interesting. Like the idea is that if there's a robots.txt and a sitemap.xml, that these are standard web things on sites that humans rarely use to get any value from, but machines and traditionally search engines really, really do. And so, well, what do we put for AI to make it better? LLMs and so on is this LLMs.txt file that describes in Markdown to the LLMs like how you can better work with this. So, with that said, you all have that, right? So you've got your LLMs.txt and the full one. This is not something I'm doing. Maybe I need to do a full one.
This one's interesting. It's a lot. So basically, it's the entire bit of documentation distilled down. Not distilled, but like written as one file, essentially. All doc strings mashed together, you might say, including guide material as well. So that's
nice.
all.
Yeah, and you've got these skills as well, which is looking super interesting, and also pretty neat. The CLI that you've created. Well, a couple of things on that. Yeah. First of all, that it will actually install the skills.
Yeah. So if you're an author, you would just use Great Docs skill install, and then the name of your library.
Nice.
For other people, that's what other people see on their site.
I think it's an interesting piece because if I have to admit I haven't seen the skills piece a lot, but if I'm understanding Rich too, this means Great Docs is also for like kind of all users, right? Like people who are interested in reading or consuming docs or using it with AI. Is that right?
Yeah. That's kind of where we're going more and more.
Yeah. So it looks like you're really leaning into making Great Docs something that works well if you're trying to generate docs and maintain them with AI, right?
We also want, if you point your agent at this site, it should be able to find these things pretty quickly. And you can actually use tools. Like there's one called what do agents see .runtime.app. Just search it up. You can put in your URL and it'll show you what pieces are picked up by different agents. It actually simulates it really nicely. And I found that just to validate things that different agents do pick up LLMs.text, LLMs.full, and there's other little pieces of like metadata, things that go in the meta tag that could be picked up to like robots text and very accept, things like that. So we're working towards making this even easier. Like you just point at the site or point at any site that you author using Great Docs, and your agent should be able to find things pretty quick.
Very exciting. I love it. Okay. And also just, you mentioned that there's the CLI, right?
Yeah.
Or I don't know what I was mentioning. But the fact that there is a CLI is another really great enablement. You can say, hey, Claude or Codex or any of these tool using agentic AI is just like, here's the CLI to do the things. Here's the docs and the skill. Make this happen, right?
Yeah. And you can even, the skills that I include, like in Great Docs, could be used to author your own Great Docs site. Like, there's all sorts of things in there for like, just how it works and like, like writing pages. they're kind of split up into like multiple name skills. So you can just use that or make your own skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very neat. All right, two really quick things. I know we're pretty much out of time for you guys. One, what I get out of this is just a static site, and I can just host it on any static site place.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
really good. So
for sure.
it could be Netlify, it could be
Yeah.
GitHub Pages. For
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
on
You can provide some fine-grained instructions for different hosts and things like that. GitHub Pages seems like a nice default. It's not, but of course, yeah, Netlify, Versal, things like that. We provide some hints that it works.
yeah, okay, very neat. Yeah, for me, I was running on Netlify for a while, but I actually had my monitoring software monitoring it, and it actually went down surprisingly often. I'm like, why is my static site going down? This makes no sense. So I've ended up recently, I've already got like a big server with tons of sites. So I'll just have a config on Nginx that just runs it, and so there's a lot of options there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Not to dwell on it, but I do remember you saying, I think, on a podcast with Hugo, talking about your Hugo Van Anderson, your approach that you have way less downtime than even some of the cloud providers. So
I know,
not
it's
to
really
go
weird.
too deep. It's interesting to hear about.
It
Netlify.
is. I could go for hours on this, so be careful there, Michael. I find it really interesting that the extreme simplicity of like I've got a server, and either it's got a self-contained Python and database runtime, or it's just even a static site. That goes a long ways, really long ways, instead of like all the 100 connected services powered by some dynamic thing underneath. And if one of them goes down, it takes a chunk with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that was maybe that was my last question. I think just the deployment side of things is really interesting. So it sounds like just wherever, right? Anything that serves static files, you're good to go.
Pretty much, yeah, because you get the site directory, and you can just go with that. Like it's a complete site in a directory. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now I remember the second thing I wanted to talk about was if I go over to the user guide and I do a quick start, you show me the structure, and I get this here, this your project, greatdocs.aml, greatdocs, et cetera. So it looks like the recommendation is to have GreatDocs as a subdirectory of your actual things that it is documenting. Is that right?
Sort of,
Or
but you
no?
don't have to keep it. I mean, like it's just going to appear there when you render
Okay.
it locally, and you can look at the site, you can preview it, but you can just delete it. Like you can have it on CI or whatever, like on your CI system. Or
I see.
However you're deploying it.
Like your
It'll
step
just
could
build
be
there and store it.
build and then copy and then delete
Yeah,
the
exactly.
folder, not necessarily the YAML. Maybe
Oh yeah, you want to
the
keep
YAML.
that. Yeah, that's config. So commit that, and hopefully I sort of like outlined it here on this page. What should be like committed, and we automatically ignore some things too, so you don't accidentally commit things you don't have to.
If I want to do the freeze, though, I probably have to keep it. Yeah.
No, we actually work around that. So we do like a pre. We got a little system there. So like I know it wipes everything out, but we have a freeze mechanism that sort of works around this sort of like ephemeral nature of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Still uses core freeze, so it just does
Yeah,
it a little
but-
different.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay. Final thoughts. People are interested in this. They want to get started. What do you tell them?
Yeah, just check out the site. I'm hoping you'll be not wowed, but that it'll resonate a little bit, and the site should demonstrate what's possible. Again, like you even just like have your agent, like like have some AI. Take a small Python package of yours, and see what it could do. Take it for a little spin, and if there's anything that you think is missing or lacking, just drop me a line like through the issues. That's like
Nice.
that's basically it.
Can I publish on read the docs?
I don't think we have that yet. Yeah.
Okay.
I never even considered that.
That's just such a one of the standard places to put docs. Not necessarily required, but it'd be interesting,
Okay, I'm gonna log that down. That's already like that's a good one.
All right, we're
think
rewriting
there's
the
a way,
roadmap
but-
live here.
Yeah, that's a toughie. The you threw down the gauntlet. This is it.
Well, sounds good. Yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you both being here. Michael, you want to have a final word as well of inspiration for folks?
What a great question. My final nudge might be like, we talked a lot about generating docs, the kind of technical activity. I do think there's this world of how do you write docs? Like, what should your content be?
Yeah.
And what should your sections of your doc site be? Obviously, we're saying goodbye, so we don't want to open that can of worms. But I just wanted to cast a light on that. That is a freaky big area on its own. I don't have great answers, so I'm just throwing some problems on people's laps. But I think that's a neat, freaky area that is worth checking out.
I think what you're doing is you're setting the stage for another episode in the future.
Yeah, that's right. We're just trying to make it a 3, like a trilogy. So
Yeah,
we're trying to get our third visit in. So
perfect. All right. Well, Rich, Michael, thanks for being here. It's great as always.
so much
Thanks for
for
having
having
us.
us.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks.